Hello friends, with all the new Commander product gushing out of Wizards these days, I've gotten sort of a nostalgia trip going. I've been thinking back to the early days of our Commander format when Wizards had only just begun to acknowledge the Commander format as a thing. It was a simpler time. My back hurt a lot less back then. I had hair. I mean, I still do, but I used to too. The Commander format was substantially less fast-paced, and we had yet to reach the levels of overabundance of Commander support that we enjoy today. Instead of getting a new Commander supplement with every single set released, we got one yearly Commander product, and that was it. Commander Christmas, it would come mid to late summer, and we would have to make do with whatever we got. Now, Commander PreCon decks have evolved substantially over the years, and so I wanted to use this video as sort of a love letter to those Commander PreCons. I want to revisit each iteration of the yearly Commander sets that we had gotten between 2011 and 2019. We'll take a look at some of the cards included that had the most impact, the cards that were the most sought after, and to just revisit the legacy of these PreCon decks. I hope you'll join me on this trip down memory lane, share some of your memories of these decks. We're obviously going to begin with the original Commander PreCon decks, released back in June of 2011. I do believe this was around the time I myself got introduced to Commander. These 5 decks were based on wedge colors, similar to the concept art here, but they were released long before that block existed. The 5 pre-constructed decks were the first time we got cards specifically designed for our format, and while we'd yet to see how broken some of these made-for-Commander cards could be, we certainly were not without our exceptions. The set brought with it 55 brand new cards, some made to support and encourage the multiplayer facet of our format that Wizard had previously not explored. Each deck had 11 of these new cards, and while we might not go into every single new card, I do want to touch upon some of the cards that had the most impact. To start, we had a number of cycles that would be distributed between each deck. Aside from the 5 main cover commanders, these also had an additional tricolor commander who could be swapped in, though these often ran with different strategies than the main commander. The decks also had a legendary Planner Chaos in their respective tricolor combinations, also usable as the commander. They also each had at least one 2-color legend that, while unable to serve as the commander of the deck out of the box, they could be built into their own commander deck and would often serve some utility within the deck strategy. We lastly had a cycle of Join Forces spells that would encourage players to pay in however much mana they wished and would get some sort of payoff for the collective payment. Finally, we had a cycle of aura enchantments called Vows that would give a buff, a keyword ability to the enchanted creature, and then a clause that prevents it from attacking the player that controls the vow. Each deck also had a copy of Soul Ring and Command Tower. Command Tower was the first card to ever reference both a commander and a color identity. These two would continue to be included in every commander deck thereafter. Speaking of, let's get into these decks. Starting off, we have Heavenly Inferno, a Mardu deck led by Kalia of the Vast. Kalia is a 2/2 human cleric with flying for 4 mana, and whenever she attacks an opponent, you can put either an angel, a demon, or a dragon from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking that opponent. Considering she was among the first cards designed with the space of commander in mind, she was incredibly powerful. Being able to cheat casting costs is a huge bonus in our format, and with the 3 creature types she supported being among the most powerful and expensive to cast, she was a force to be reckoned with. At 4 mana, she was relatively inexpensive to cast herself, so dropping her into play after casting something like Lightning Greaves the turn before could lead into a very powerful board state. And her PreCon deck was not without its threats. With such powerful cards as Angel of Despair, Bladewind the Arisen, and Akroma Angel of Fury, she could easily dominate board states right out of the box. We also got Oros the Avenger, who, when deals combat damage to a player, its controller can pay 3 mana to Lightning Bolt each non-white creature. I can appreciate the cycle of the Planner Chaos Dragons being here, as they are very much in the spirit of Elder Dragon Highlander, and their abilities are easy enough to understand for someone new to the format or new to Magic altogether. Tariel, Reckoner of Souls, was an angel that had some reanimation strategy, although that ability was very largely dependent on luck. I'm not really a fan of this legend. At 7 mana, it's simply too expensive to cast, and the creature it reanimates being randomly chosen is not ideal. As for the remainder of the 99, we did get some goodies in this PreCon. This deck contained Mother of Runes, a cheaply costed source of creature-based protection that could deter removal, blocks, and interaction, who was valuable tech for a lot of Voltron-style decks. Path to Exile saw a printing here as well, a staple 1-mana instant speed removal spell in white, and I do believe this is the only time this card saw a printing in a Commander PreCon deck. Lightning Greaves, a powerful equipment card that gave both haste and shroud for a free equip cost, was reprinted here. Stranglehold, a hard stack style card that locked out tutor abilities and negated extra turn taking, was printed here for the first time. Financially, this deck is probably the worst offender of this set of PreCon decks. Were you to buy all the singles individually from this deck today, the total cost would be approximately $80. If you were to buy the PreCon deck itself, sealed, it will sell for substantially more. Card Kingdom sells this PreCon deck, which also comes with 3 oversized foils of the Commander options, for $349. So obviously, unless you're going for the collector aspect of owning this deck and sticking it on your shelf and being like, ooh, look what I've got, you may be better off just buying the cards you need from this deck. I would say of all these decks, Kaalia has the most enduring legacy. She still remains a fantastic commander option even today. She has a lot of value as an aggro deck, having some brutal synergies with cards such as Master of Cruelties, which is a combo line that can one-shot an opponent regardless of their life total. Where most of the decks we will cover here have since faded from the spotlight, I think Kaalia's mana value and her role as a spiky aggro deck have given endurance to her popularity. The Heavenly Inferno PreCon even made its way into the Commander Anthology set, a collection of 4 Commander PreCon decks from different years that we'll be taking a look at later on in this series. Political Puppets was the next deck, a Jeskai deck led by Zedru the Great-Hearted. Zedru is a 2/4 Minotaur Monk, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of permanents you own that your opponents control. You can also pay 1 each of red, white, and blue to give control of a permanent you own to an opponent. This was the first Politics Matter PreCon, where the majority of the deck focused on abilities that would encourage table politics, an element of gameplay that's exclusive to Commander. Cards like Goblin Cadets can be used to leverage against opponents. This deck also had some Pillow Fort cards to help protect yourself, such as Propaganda and Ghostly Prison, but it also had cards like Crescendo of War that would make for more intense gameplay. The goal of the deck was to sit back behind your defenses while your opponents went at each other, only for you to pick them off at the end once they've exhausted their resources. Ruhan of the Fomori was an alternate commander for this deck and utilized a sort of chaotic style of play, randomly choosing which opponent would be attacked, and its size as a 7/7 for 4 mana made it a tremendous threat at a time when commander damage was much more prevalent. Numot the Devastator, our Planar Chaos Dragon, had land destruction on it for 3 mana upon connecting with an opponent. I think of the dragon cycle in this set, these was definitely up in my favorites. Trade Secrets was reprinted in this deck, a card that was so powerful it managed to get itself put onto the Commander ban list. Insurrection is in this deck, a card that, while pretty costly to cast, can be a wild way to end games. Nowadays, Red has become much more powerful in Commander, and so a card like this might actually be worth taking a look at. Howling Mind, one of my personal favorite group hug style cards, was in this deck, letting each player draw an additional card each turn. Champion's Helm, which would give a legendary creature hexproof along with a sizable buff, was introduced here. It would later be given the Kaladesh Invention treatment as its only other printing. Chaos Warp and Oblation, 2 decent removal spells in colors that would later get better removal, were included here. At the time, these 2 are sort of the gold standard of commander removal spells in these colors. Brainstorm, the Graceful Charity of Magic, is in here, as is Flusterstorm, which is a tremendously powerful counterspell that sees heavy play in many competitive formats. This deck had a bit more financial value to it. If you were to buy just the singles from this deck, it would set you back about $123, but if you were to buy the PreCon sealed, it would be about $199. This is one of the rare instances where a PreCon deck would contain a card that would be later banned, but aside from that, I think this PreCon is a little underwhelming. group hugs have become a bit of a rarity in our format. I think Zedru is an example of a commander that had the potential and a great design, but that potential got squandered by a lack of explored design space. I think this strategy struggles to win if the table doesn't roll with the whole shtick of group hug. We have plenty of cards in Magic that are deliberately designed to harm yourself, and while those would be otherwise entirely unplayable in literally any other deck, I think they would make great additions to a Zedru deck. The thing is, I think the game has since moved beyond a need or viability for a politics matter deck. Politics are fine in Commander, don't get me wrong, but I feel like a deck centered around them needs to have the ability to pivot to a winning strategy should the politic game fail. Counterpunch is our next deck, led by Gave, Guru of Spores, an Abzan legend that once was one of the most powerful combo decks and one of my favorite commanders. This deck would combine +1/+1 counters with a token strategy with some reanimation strategies. As for the other legendary creatures in the deck, we have Carador, a graveyard recursion strategies, and it's actually one of the first instances of a card that could circumvent the commander tax, and it's here as an alternate commander, so neat. Teneb, the Harvester, was our dragon for the deck, having some reanimation on it that was actually kinda good. You just had to connect with an opponent, but then you could reanimate any creature from any grave for just 3 mana. This deck also introduced the world to Scavenging Ooze, a card that gave powerful grave hate to a 2-drop. This card would later see print in a regular course set, introducing it into the world of Modern and Standard, and to this day it is still a go-to for decks looking to remove threats from the graveyard. Sakura Tribe Elder came in the deck too, a powerful reprint from Kamigawa. It's a nice little creature-based ramp card. Speaking of, we have Fertilid here. It's a counter-based land ramp that can also be used to help an opponent ramp if you wanted to do that. Vampire Nightwalk, a keyword soup creature that had a powerful combination of abilities, is here literally just so you can dump counters on it and attack. Shriek Maw, a removal spell in creature form, often used for its evoke cost, shows up here. Hornet Queen, it's an incredible token generator who creates some dangerous tokens that have death touch. Comes in as perhaps the best token generator of the deck. Stormhurt, a reprint originally from Guild Pact that otherwise sees no play anywhere else due to its 10 mana value. It found a home in Commander as a top-end finisher. Because of the higher mana production and the potential for higher life totals, Stormhurt is a tremendous threat to deal with, threatening the field with flying tokens. Skullclamp is included here as a ridiculously strong card draw engine to be reckoned with. Acorn Catapult, while nothing incredibly powerful, it's in this deck and I had to mention it because it creates squirrels. Aura Shards, an enchantment and an artifact hate card, is in here taking full advantage of the token production in this deck. Every creature that enters play naturalizes. Now, in spite of the amount of commander staples this deck contains, this is one of the cheaper decks of this set to buy the singles of, coming in at about $71. For the PreCon, however, you still would be shelling out around $300. I'm a little bit biased about this deck as it is my favorite color combinations. A few years ago, Gave was the head of perhaps the most powerful combo deck in Commander. It enables tons of infinite combos. Carador, I think, still saves a decent amount of play. It's a great option for a tricolored Reanimator deck for someone not wanting to play something like Marin of Clan Nel Toth. Mirror Mastery is the Temur colored deck led by Riku of Two Reflections, and the deck focuses on getting extra value out of cards by copying them. Our other commander options include Animar, one of the most powerful of the original commanders, and leads powerful decks that utilize the gigantic Eldrazi creatures, the stealthy morph creatures, and just general zoo decks by making their generic mana costs less. The original Eldrazi could literally be cast for free should Animar be out and be large enough. Intet the Dreamer is one of the first cards to provide with Impulsive Draw, something we would see on a lot of other commanders later on. This deck does come swinging out with some fun toys like Edric, Spymaster of Trest, who is a powerhouse in his own right. How's your brother Leovold doing? I miss him. Hydra Omnivore is in here with a powerful ability to damage all players at the table simply by connecting with one. Put Infect on him and go to town. Artisan of Kozilek is a pretty potent Eldrazi creature. It allows you to reanimate a creature from your graveyard. This PreCon is also the only of this cycle that contains a Planeswalker, the OG Garruk Wildspeaker. Now, to buy all the singles from this PreCon deck today, you'd be putting out about $92. $200 for the sealed product, and I would say of the original PreCon decks, this probably has the weakest out-of-box synergies. It's aiming to simply run over opponent with the large value creatures we copy, and then using sorcery and instants for additional value. I think this is the reason that we don't see much from this deck's commanders these days. I see Animar popping up from time to time. It was a shoe-in for Eldrazi deck and Morph decks. Unfortunately, most of these decks have found better, more in-theme options in more recent years. Our final deck, and perhaps my personal favorite, Devour for Power, is a Sultai deck led by the Mimeoplasm. Mimeoplasm is a take on the clone deck, able to enter the battlefield exiling 2 creatures from any graveyard to become a copy of one of the creatures exiled, but then putting +1/+1 counters on it equal to the power of the other. So this deck is a deck that deals in +1/+1 counters, similar to the Counterpunch strategy, but without the token strategy. Instead, we see more graveyard synergies and self-mill to support the Mimeoplasm. Our alternate commanders are Varosh the Hunter, who would grow huger every time they connect with an opponent, and Damia, Sage of Stone, who would always ensure you begin your turn with 7 cards in hand. Damia would prove to be quickly outclassed as we saw much better card advantage be introduced, but I like Varosh as a basic commander to teach players the format with. This deck also brought us Skullbriar the Walking Grave, one of my favorite and first Voltron commanders. This deck reprinted Eternal Witness, which would later become one of the most popular recursion cards from the graveyard. Solemn Simulacrum is here too. It's a powerful ramp and card draw piece. Muldrifter makes an appearance here. It's an iconic evoke creature that offers us more card draw. Acidic Slime is a flexible card removal piece that has long time held staple status. Rexiel the Hidden Deep is a commander I covered in the early days of this channel, and it brought some interesting interactions with instants and sorceries in opponents' graveyard. Butcher Malakir gives us a redundancy on Grave Pact effects, which would make removing our creatures detrimental to opponents. Windfall is printed in here, and it gave way to a series of cards themed after its effect of cycling players' hands. Factor Fiction is in here too, a card that has quite the versatility in this deck and many graveyard-centric decks. Living Death, a ridiculously powerful game ender, is in this deck. It's a card that sees play in countless decks, even up to the CEDH level. Oblivion Stone is a neat little board wipe that is clearly telegraphed, but it is something to still look out for. And then, like I said before, Grave Pact, the aforementioned duality with Butcher, is also in here. Now, to buy just the singles from this deck, you would be paying approximately $81. For the sealed, $300. I think of the PreCon decks, this has the most cards in it that see play. The Mimeoplasm is one of my favorite Sultai commanders, and I know many decks still use this as a fun commander. Damia, unfortunately, sees almost no play these days because of her outrageously high mana cost and the abundance of, well, better options. As a first run of commander decks, these were a very strong foray into Wizards supporting a fan format. They would, of course, improve on this design for years to come, eventually honing in on some of these strategies and making better quality products. We do have a few cards that are fun in a more casual and relaxed circles, and then you, of course, have cards like Flusterstorm and Scavenging Ooze that are still seeing play today. One of the biggest flaws of these decks, and unfortunately many early Commander PreCon decks, is their overall construction. Each deck had 3 primary commander options, and of the 97 other cards, roughly a third of that was dedicated to each commander. Considering many of the legendary creatures in this deck did vastly different things, this was problematic. This made for some uneven gameplay, synergy issues, and a great need for upgrades and improvement. This general lack of focus would unfortunately be the pattern for quite the next few years of PreCons, as each deck had always included cards to support each commander option, meaning to upgrade these decks you would have to choose a commander of the options available and then replace everything that didn't support that strategy. Their biggest strength would be their accessibility. These decks were $29.95, so for $30 you could buy a fully built commander deck, bust it open, and play a game. That price point is something I desperately wish Wizards would return to, especially in this day and age of product flooding. $30 is a great entry point for the format, and even though these decks did need work, you'd be well on your way to having your own commander deck. These were also a limited print run product. I don't believe Wizards was super confident these would be successful, so finding them may have been tricky. But at a time where Wizards was hesitant to support a fan-made format like Commander, this was a bold move that in the end paid off for them, and then some. The following year would not see a cycle of Commander precons. Instead, Wizards would release a supplemental product called the Commander's Arsenal, which we will take a look at in the next video. But for now, thank you all for spending time with me today as we looked at the original Commander decks. What kind of experiences do you have with this set? Let me know what you think about this series. It's substantially more research and work than my usual deck videos, but it's something I really enjoyed looking into. I very much enjoyed exploring the design space of the older decks, and I hope to continue this project, so let me know if you'd like to see more. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.